This is Pastor Jeff Chavis. I'm the pastor of Church Online. We're an online community of faith. We have Bible studies and we meet on Sundays, and you can find us at churchonline.com. But we spell that uniquely, CHRCH, because we say all that's missing is you. Church Online. So this morning, I want to talk about solitude. Time alone with God. When I say solitude, maybe our mind thinks about monks in the Middle Ages, individuals that would go out into the desert and spend years and years praying and time alone with God. But the truth is, we all need times of solitude. In fact, Jesus himself practiced solitude. I want to give you a couple of verses of scripture where we find in the Gospels Jesus doing this very thing. And I want to put it into its context. The first place is Luke 5:15 and 16. It says, "However, the report went around concerning him all the more, and great multitudes came together to hear and to be healed of him and their infirmities. So he himself often withdrew into the wilderness and prayed." It seems like here in Luke chapter 5, the ministry is growing. People are surrounding him. More and more people came to be healed. So you'd say this might be a stressful time. And what does Jesus do? He withdraws to a lonely place. It says specifically he went to the desert or deserted places, the wilderness they called that. So he would go into nature to be alone during stressful times. The second one, and this is in Luke chapter 6, 12 and 13. "Now it came to pass in those days that he went out to the mountain to pray, and continued all night in prayer to God. And when it was day, he called his disciples to himself, and from them he chose 12, whom he also named apostles." You would say that he went into this deserted, lonely place, and it says specifically he went to a mountain to pray, and he did that before he was making this big decision. I'm sure in his heart he knew exactly who was going to be his disciples. He knew their background. He'd seen them. But just before calling them and truly beginning the ministry that God had for him, he spent some time alone in solitude and in prayer. One more, and this is in Matthew 14:13. This is after the death of John the Baptist. So obviously another stressful time, but stressful in terms of mourning. And it says specifically, Matthew 14:13, "When Jesus heard about it, he withdrew from there by boat to a remote place to be alone. When the crowds heard this, they followed him on foot from the towns." So in a time of stress, again, a time of grief, we can totally understand that, can't we? I'm sure we've all been there at various points in time in our lives when we're grieving, and all you want to do is just be alone, be away from the crowd, spend time alone with God. This practice continued into the early church. We see this with the early church fathers, the first, second centuries, also into the Middle Ages. It was said of St. Francis that he would seek out a lonely spot or an abandoned church where he could go to pray all night. That was his practice as well. And then Thomas Merton said, "Not all men are called to be hermits, but all men need enough silence and solitude in their lives to enable the deep inner voice of their own true self to be heard at least occasionally." And I love that. I feel as if our modern society becomes so noisy, so busy. The way I heard it expressed was like this. If you imagine in your mind, I don't know, you're up in the mountains and you come across a little pond or a pool of water, and it's so clear that you could see all the way to the bottom. You may be able to make out little fish or tadpoles or whatever, and you can see clearly all the way down until you throw in a rock and the waters are stirred. The example that was used is this is like our soul. In our modern world, our souls just get constantly stirred up, and we can't see clearly all the way until we have those moments of solitude. I want to encourage you. This is not, again, some strange spiritual task. This is something that Jesus himself practiced. Again, remember the times. He did it as things were getting busy in the ministry. He did it before making a big decision. And of course, he did it during times of grief. Maybe there's some of us today, and maybe that describes your life, one of those things. Maybe it is, as I said, things are really busy in your lives, and it seems like you just don't have time. In fact, you would say, I don't know even what you're talking about. I have no idea how I would find time because my life is so busy and so stressful. That is not the way God has designed our lives to be, with so much busyness that we don't have time to pray, to reflect on the scriptures, to really start thinking of the big things of God. This is what solitude is for. The other part, before we make a big decision, that the worst thing that we could possibly do is we're on the edge of a big decision in our lives and we just make it in the busyness of the moment. Oh, now I know that's actually a sales tactic. Some salespeople want to keep you busy and keep you moving, and you won't be able to see clearly, so you just make the decision in the spur of the moment. But that's not a good thing, especially if this decision that we need to make is something that has spiritual implications. We need to have those moments when we can be alone and reflect and ask God. I know there are many people, and that's our thought process. We want to know the will of God. We want to find the direction of God. I have a sense it's going to be very hard to find if we're in the busyness of our day. We need to have those times when we're alone, talking to God, reading His Word, yes, listening for Him. And then again, the third time, the grief. Jesus had just heard about the death of John the Baptist, and we know the story. He was beheaded. But we have to remind ourselves that John the Baptist was a relative, a cousin at some level of Jesus. So he's a family member that died, not just a ministry person. He's a family member, and there's got to be that grief and sorrow. And that's definitely a time we need to be alone. I think maybe during those times of grief and sorrow are maybe the times when it's most prevalent to us, that we really need some time to be alone. In our minds, we think, I don't want to have people keep saying they're sorry. I don't want people to just say these things to me. Instead, I just need to be alone for a time. Maybe reflect on the individual that we've lost, but more than that, it's a moment for us to be with God, pray to God, help Him to comfort our souls. His word said He is near to the brokenhearted, and we definitely don't need the stirring waters of our busy times during that time. So today, I want you to think about that. Where are you in this big spectrum? And do you have that time where you can be alone with God? I've got to tell you, this may sound a little strange, but some of my greatest alone times with God have been during my commutes, when it's just me in the car. Yes, there are times I'm listening and praising and worshiping to the music, but other times you just turn that way down or turn that off. And imagine that God's right there in the passenger seat with you and just talk. Some of the greatest alone times can be those times, like it says, Jesus went into nature, into creation. Maybe that's something we need. I don't know where everybody is this morning, but I do know we all need these times